She thought she was living the perfect life. He thought he was just another forgotten soul. But when the truth comes crashing down, secrets, betrayal, and a hidden legacy, nothing will ever be the same. Who's really in control? And what happens? When the past comes to claim its revenge, stay with us until the end. The twist will leave you speechless. The scorching sun beat down on the streets of Los Angeles as Alex, a 28-year-old man, sat on the cracked sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, barely noticing the frantic rush of people passing him by. His once vibrant, blue eyes, now hollow and dull, stared blankly at the bustling city, absorbing none of its energy. His tattered clothes clung to his emaciated frame, and his ribs poked through his shirt, a silent testament to the weeks of neglect and hunger. He had been here, on these streets, for what felt like an eternity. The city, with all its wealth and glamour, was a world that he no longer belonged to. He was invisible to everyone who passed him, just another beggar in a sea of nameless faces. The weight of the years had settled on him like a heavy cloak, and as he sat there, each second stretched into an unbearable eternity. His stomach, empty and gnawing at him relentlessly, reminded him that it had been days since he had eaten. Alex murmured softly to himself, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Just one more day, Alex. You can do it. Someone will notice you today." But the truth was painfully clear to him. No one cared. Not today, not yesterday, and not tomorrow. The city had long since turned its back on him, and he had long since stopped believing that there was hope in his situation. Hunger, loneliness, and exhaustion were his constant companions now, but so too was a quiet sense of pride. Despite everything, he hadn't yet resorted to rummaging through trash cans in search of scraps, though the temptation was always there. His pride, the last shred of dignity he had left, kept him from sinking further. He had once been someone who dreamed of a life full of possibilities, someone who thought that with enough hard work he could climb the social ladder. But that person had long since disappeared, swallowed by the streets. As the sun set behind the towering buildings, casting long shadows on the ground, Alex felt more alone than ever. His mind wandered back to a time when he had a family, a home, and a future he could look forward to. The memories were painful, like ghosts that haunted him at night, reminding him of what he had lost. The laughter of a childhood, the warmth of a mother's embrace, now just echoes that faded with the years. The bustling street around him felt surreal, like a distant dream he could no longer reach. The people moving past him were in a hurry, caught up in the trivialities of their own lives, while he sat in the shadows unnoticed and ignored. Alex's stomach growled loudly, and his gaze followed every person who passed by with bags of food, the scent of coffee wafting through the air. His mouth watered, but he resisted. He had made a promise to himself long ago that he wouldn't beg, that he wouldn't stoop to asking for handouts. But the hunger gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. Maybe he could ask for just a little food, just to get by until tomorrow. He watched a young couple walk by, laughing as they shared a cup of coffee. His eyes followed them with a mixture of longing and bitterness. He had once been part of that world. He had once been like them, carefree, with a future ahead of him. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now he was just another face in the crowd, a face people avoided, a man who had fallen through the cracks of society. Maybe I should try the shelter again, Alex thought. But the memory of his last visit made him shudder. It had been cold, crowded, and unpleasant. The shelter was a temporary fix at best, nowhere near the safety or comfort he had once known. And so he stayed on the streets, enduring the pain of hunger and the shame of being ignored by everyone who passed him. He didn't want to ask for help. He didn't want to admit that he had nothing left. But it was getting harder to hold on to, that pride. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Alex fought the urge to go through the nearby trash cans, his stomach growling louder with each passing minute. He hadn't given up, not completely. But the temptation was starting to overwhelm him. A moment of weakness, a crack in his resolve. And yet he stayed still. Just one more hour, he thought. One more hour and maybe someone will notice him. Maybe today things will change. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, Alex's attention was caught by a woman who approached him. She was middle-aged, with gentle eyes and a soft smile. She stopped in front of him without saying a word, reaching into her bag and pulling out a paper bag. Without hesitation, she handed it to Alex. The aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted meat filled the air, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't eaten in days, and the smell of the sandwich was overwhelming. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." The woman smiled softly at him, her eyes filled with quiet compassion. She said nothing, just gave him a nod before turning and walking away. Alex watched her go, feeling a warmth spread through his chest, a small flicker of hope igniting within him. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Not as a beggar, not as a shadow, but as a person, a human being worthy of kindness. The sandwich, though modest, felt like a lifeline. As Alex prepared to take his first bite, he noticed 2 other homeless men sitting nearby. Their eyes were hollow with hunger, their faces gaunt from days without food. Without thinking, Alex tore the sandwich in half and handed it to them. "Let's share," he said, his voice low but filled with kindness. "No one should go hungry. If we can help each other." The 2 men looked at him surprised, but their expressions softened with gratitude. One of them nodded. "Thanks, man. You don't know how much this means." As they ate, Alex's heart felt lighter. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had shared what little he had, and in doing so, he had rediscovered a part of himself that he thought was gone, his humanity. The world had been cruel to him, but for a brief moment he felt a connection. He wasn't alone in this struggle. There were others who understood his pain, others who shared in his suffering, and together, they were surviving. Across the street, Olivia, a young woman with long brown hair and kind green eyes, was walking with her mother, Victoria. Olivia paused as she caught sight of the small group sitting on the corner, sharing a meal. A lump formed in her throat as she watched the scene unfold. She had always been compassionate, always wanting to help those less fortunate. But as she stood there, her heart torn between compassion and fear, she felt a tug in her chest. She wanted to do something, anything to help. But before she could act, her stepmother, Victoria, grabbed her arm, pulling her away. "Don't even think about it, Olivia," Victoria hissed, her grip tight. "I won't allow you to associate with people like that." Olivia's heart sank as she looked back at Alex and the 2 men. How could her stepmother be so cruel? How could she ignore the suffering of others with such ease? "But they need help," Olivia protested, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and confusion. "How can we just walk away from them?" Victoria's cold gaze met hers, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "You're too naive, Olivia. These people are dangerous. You don't know what they'll do with any money you give them. They're probably just looking for a handout to feed their addictions." Olivia shook her head, her voice shaking. "That man just shared his food with others. How can you be so heartless, Victoria?" Victoria's face twisted in disgust. She grabbed Olivia's arm again, this time with even more force. "You don't understand how the world works, dear. These people chose this lifestyle. It's not our responsibility to save them." But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She couldn't let this moment pass without doing something. Despite her stepmother's firm grip on her, Olivia broke free and crossed the street, her heart pounding. As she reached Alex, she pulled out a few bills from her purse and extended them to him, her hands trembling. "Please take this," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I hope it helps." Alex looked up at her, his eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Olivia smiled, her heart aching as she walked away. For the first time in her life, she had acted on her compassion, despite the harsh judgment of her stepmother. It felt right, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more significant than she could have imagined. As Olivia walked back to her mother, Victoria gave her a stern look, but Olivia didn't care. Something had shifted inside her, and she knew deep down that she would never be the same again. She had seen the world through new eyes, a world where kindness and compassion could still make a difference. Victoria watched Olivia walk away, her heart sinking with a combination of anger and disgust. She had always believed that her stepdaughter was too soft, too idealistic. Olivia had grown up in a world of privilege, and while Victoria admired her ability to care for others, she couldn't stand the way Olivia seemed to think that everyone deserved the same kindness, especially people like those Alex and his companions. She felt a pang of jealousy. Why did Olivia always insist on trying to fix what wasn't broken? She had built her life on the principle that hard work, social status, and wealth were what truly mattered. People like Alex, who sat on the sidewalks begging for scraps, were beneath her. They weren't worth anyone's attention or sympathy. They had made their choices, and it was not her responsibility to help them. Yet, Here was her stepdaughter extending a hand to someone so far below their station. It was humiliating. As Olivia walked back to her side, Victoria quickly suppressed the unease creeping through her. "What do you think you're doing, Olivia?" she asked sharply, her voice ice-cold with authority. "How could you lower yourself like that? Those people are nothing but parasites." Olivia's eyes, still warm with the compassion she had felt for Alex, met her stepmother's cold, calculating stare. She didn't say anything at first, trying to gather her thoughts, but it was impossible to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. She had been raised by Victoria, taught to value appearances and social standing, but the events of the day had made her realize how empty those values felt now. "I just wanted to help," Olivia replied softly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the growing conviction she felt. "They're human beings, Victoria, just like us. How can we ignore their suffering when it's right in front of us?" Victoria laughed bitterly, her lips curling into a disdainful smile. "You are so naive, Olivia. Do you really think that man and his friends are anything more than criminals, addicts, and failures? People like him make choices. They choose to live on the streets, choose to beg for scraps. They don't deserve our help. The world is not as idealistic as you want it to be." Olivia's hands balled into fists at her sides. She could feel the anger rising within her. But it was not the kind of anger that came from rebellion. It was an anger born from understanding, from realizing just how deeply entrenched her stepmother's views were. Victoria was blind to the suffering that lay just beneath her nose, and no matter how hard Olivia tried, she could not reach her. "Maybe you're wrong, Victoria," Olivia finally said, the words tumbling out of her mouth before she could stop them. "Maybe it's not about whether or not they deserve help. Maybe it's about showing kindness because that's what makes us human. Because we can choose to help instead of turning away." Victoria's face twisted into something darker. "You're wrong, Olivia," she said through clenched teeth. "This is not about kindness. This is about survival, about knowing your place in the world. People like him," she nodded toward Alex, "are beneath us. And I will not allow you to drag our family's name into the dirt by associating with them." Olivia's heart pounded. She had heard this kind of talk before, but hearing it now after what she had witnessed felt like a slap to her soul. She had always known Victoria was harsh, but this was something else entirely. Olivia felt the sting of betrayal, not just for the way her stepmother viewed the world, but for how Victoria was trying to force her to believe the same. She wasn't just pushing her away from the homeless, she was trying to erase the very values that had shaped Olivia into the person she had become. "Why do you always have to control everything, Victoria?" Olivia blurted out, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why can't I make my own decisions? See the world for what it really is, not through your eyes. I don't want to live my life afraid to care, afraid to help. Why can't you see that?" Victoria's icy gaze hardened even further. "You're still just a girl, Olivia. You think you can change the world with your idealism, but the world won't change for you. You think helping beggars is going to make a difference? You're a fool. People like them, they'll never be anything more than what they are. And if you want to ruin your life by associating with them, that's your choice. But don't expect me to condone it." The air between them felt thick, suffocating, as Olivia realized just how deep Victoria's disdain for the less fortunate ran. Victoria wasn't just controlling Olivia's choices. She was trying to break her spirit, to mold her into someone who fit into the narrow, unforgiving world Victoria had chosen to live in. A world where wealth and status were the only things that mattered. A world where compassion was a weakness. But Olivia was no longer the girl who had blindly followed Victoria's rules. She had seen something on the street, something that had sparked a fire in her, a fire that wouldn't be easily extinguished. It wasn't just about helping one person, one beggar. It was about standing up for the people who had no voice, for those who were constantly overlooked, ignored, and discarded. She could no longer pretend that the world was as simple as her stepmother made it out to be. As the car pulled up to the mansion, Olivia's gaze lingered on the street corner where she had met Alex. She could still picture his tired yet grateful eyes, the way he had shared his meager meal with the others. He hadn't seen himself as above anyone, but rather as part of something greater, humanity in all its messy, imperfect form. Olivia felt a pang in her chest as she thought of him, of the other people on the streets who were trying to survive, trying to make it through each day. Her thoughts were interrupted when Victoria abruptly stopped the car. She turned to Olivia, her face a mask of disgust and condescension. "You're going to learn a lesson today, my dear. One that will change the way you see the world, whether you like it or not." Victoria's voice was laced with venom. You've had enough of your little acts of kindness. It's time you learned what it really means to live in this world." Olivia stared back at her stepmother, feeling the weight of her words settle over her like a dark cloud. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. Victoria might have been the one pulling the strings, but Olivia was no longer the puppet. The truth had been revealed to her, and she couldn't pretend to be blind to it any longer. There was no going back. Victoria might have thought that forcing Olivia to marry someone like Alex was a punishment, a way to teach her a lesson in humility. But Olivia wasn't afraid of the consequences anymore. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in, to fight for what was right. The world might be cruel. It might be full of people who turned a blind eye to suffering, but Olivia knew now that she had a choice. She could either become like her stepmother, hard and cold, or she could be the change she wanted to see. That night, Olivia lay awake in her bed, the words of her stepmother echoing in her mind. "Learn the hard truths of the world," she had said. But Olivia knew the truth was not as simple as Victoria made it seem. The real truth was that kindness, compassion, and love could change lives, and she was determined to prove it. Her resolve had been tested, but it had only made her stronger. Tomorrow she would take a step forward. Tomorrow she would begin to write her own story, one that had nothing to do with the cold, judgmental world Victoria had tried to trap her in. Tomorrow she would make her own choices, and no matter what happened next, she knew she would never let anyone, not even Victoria, strip away her ability to care. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that her life was on the verge of a great shift. It wasn't just the confrontation with Victoria or the intensity of the events that had unfolded since the day she gave money to Alex. It was the realization that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The way Victoria had reacted, so cold, so disdainful, had sparked something within her. She had always known that her stepmother's views were rigid, but she had never fully understood the depth of Victoria's cruelty toward those who were less fortunate. The argument between them had left a bitter taste in Olivia's mouth, but it was not just the anger from their exchange that lingered. It was the realization that Victoria's way of seeing the world wasn't something that Olivia could accept anymore. The kindness that she had always extended to others, especially to those in need, had always been part of her heart. But Victoria had tried to convince her that it was a weakness. Olivia had spent most of her life believing that her place in the world was to uphold the family name, to preserve the wealth and status her father and stepmother had carefully built. She had always deferred to their guidance, convinced that their way was the only right way. But now, standing at the edge of this new, unfamiliar world, Olivia found herself questioning everything she had ever been taught. There was a part of her that felt like a stranger in her own life, trapped in a role she had never chosen. The act of giving money to Alex had seemed so small in comparison to the weight of the world that Victoria had tried to impose on her. But to Olivia, it was a moment of truth, her own truth that she could no longer ignore. It wasn't just a simple gesture. It was her way of rebelling against the cold-hearted reality that Victoria had always upheld, one that valued social standing and wealth above everything else, including humanity. What she had done was something her stepmother would never understand. But it was more than just an act of kindness. It was a declaration of who Olivia truly wanted to be, a person who cared about others beyond their status or their wealth. For the first time in a long while, Olivia felt a surge of strength she had never known existed within her. The realization hit her with a force she hadn't expected. She didn't need Victoria's approval to be who she was. She didn't need to keep pretending to fit into a mold that had never truly suited her. The world had become a mirror, showing her that the kindness she had always offered was not a flaw, but a strength, a quiet rebellion against the cruelty of the world. But with this newfound clarity came a painful awareness that things would only get harder. Victoria wasn't going to let her make her own choices so easily. She had made it clear that Olivia's acts of compassion were a betrayal of everything they stood for. The tension between them was growing more palpable every day. And yet Olivia found herself more determined than ever to carve out her own path. The days after the confrontation were filled with a quiet tension. Olivia went through the motions, attending the parties and events her stepmother insisted she attend, pretending to be the person she had always been. But inside she was different. She wasn't the naive girl who blindly followed Victoria's every demand. She had seen through the facade, and now she understood how far Victoria was willing to go to maintain control. It was during one of these events, a lavish dinner at a luxury hotel, that Olivia realized just how deep the rift between them had grown. She stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, watching her stepmother mingle with the high society crowd, her face frozen in a mask of poise and charm. Everything about Victoria screamed control. Control over her image, over the people around her, and over the life Olivia had been expected to live. But Olivia could feel the weight of the chains that had kept her bound to that world for so long, and in that moment she understood that the chains weren't just external. They had been inside her all along, woven into the fabric of her identity, a product of years of conditioning. She glanced around the room, taking in the glamorous guests, the expensive gowns, and the extravagant decor. But instead of feeling admiration or awe, she felt a deep sense of disconnect. This was the world Victoria had worked so hard to create. This was the world she was trying to drag Olivia back into. But Olivia knew now that it wasn't her world. It never had been. The realization hit her with the force of a revelation. She didn't belong here. Not in the way Victoria wanted her to. Olivia wasn't a piece in her stepmother's game. She wasn't a trophy to be flaunted at these gatherings. And the more she tried to conform, the more she felt like she was losing herself in the process. The walls of the ballroom, once so grand and magnificent, now felt suffocating. As Olivia stood there quietly observing the lives of the people around her, she noticed Alex across the room. He was standing by the bar, his disheveled appearance, a stark contrast to the polished, perfectly manicured guests around him. But there was something about him, something raw and authentic, that drew her in. His gaze met hers for a brief moment, and despite the distance between them, she felt a connection she hadn't expected. For a second, the walls of the ballroom faded away. Olivia could see him, really see him. Not just the homeless man she had met on the street, but a person, a human being, whose dignity and strength had survived in a world that had tried to break him. Her thoughts were interrupted when Victoria approached her, her face tight with an expression that was all too familiar. "Olivia," she said sharply, her voice icy. "I see you've managed to drag that man into our world too. You're not going to let him ruin everything, are you?" Olivia's chest tightened at the sight of her stepmother's disdain. But this time she didn't flinch. She stood tall, meeting Victoria's gaze with newfound strength. "No, Victoria," she said, her voice steady. "He's not the one ruining anything. It's you." For a long moment, Victoria's eyes searched Olivia's face, as if looking for any trace of the obedient daughter she had once controlled. But there was nothing there now. Olivia was different. She had changed and she wasn't going back. Victoria's lips curled into a thin, contemptuous smile. "You think you've won, don't you?" she sneered. "You think you figured it all out. But you're just a foolish girl, Olivia. The world doesn't care about your ideals. It cares about power. It cares about status. And you're about to learn that the hard way." Olivia didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had learned more in the past few days than she ever had under Victoria's roof. She had learned that kindness wasn't a weakness. She had learned that she could choose to see the world differently. And for the first time in her life, she was choosing to follow her heart. As the night wore on and the guests continued to dance and laugh, Olivia knew that her journey had just begun. She wasn't sure what the future held or how the rest of her story would unfold. But she knew one thing for certain. She would no longer be controlled. She would no longer hide behind the mask of privilege and status. She would fight for what was right, even if it meant defying the world she had been raised in. And with that decision, Olivia stepped into a new chapter of her life. A life where compassion, not power, would guide her every move. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. Ready to face the truth of who she was and the power she had to change the world around her. The days that followed the revelation at the wedding seemed to blur together for Olivia. She moved through them mechanically, unable to escape the weight of the truth that had been exposed. The life she had known, the world that had been so carefully constructed around her, had shattered. Victoria's manipulations were no longer a distant suspicion, but a cold, painful reality. It was a truth that sent shivers down Olivia's spine every time she thought about it. As much as she wanted to be angry, to lash out at her stepmother for the years of deception, Olivia couldn't shake the growing sense of disbelief that clouded her mind. How could Victoria, the woman who had raised her, who had been her mother in all but blood, be capable of such monstrous actions? How could the woman she had trusted so deeply betray not just her, but a whole family, all in the pursuit of power and wealth? The moment Alex had revealed his true identity to the world, everything had changed. The shock waves of that revelation were still rippling through their lives, and Olivia felt every tremor. Alex, or rather Hudson Howard, was not just a beggar. as she had once thought. He was the legitimate heir to her family's fortune. He was the son of Jonathan Howard, Victoria's first husband, and the rightful heir who had been discarded, erased from existence. When Alex, no Hudson, spoke those words, it felt as though the very ground beneath her had been ripped away. The man she had felt sympathy for, the man she had tried to help in a moment of kindness, was the son of the woman who had ruthlessly destroyed his life. It was a cruel irony, and it left Olivia feeling like she was drowning in the weight of it all. As the days passed, Olivia found herself grappling with a growing sense of guilt. Had she somehow been complicit in Victoria's cruel game? She had been blind to the truth for so long, following the path that had been laid out for her without questioning it. The guilt gnawed at her, twisting in her stomach every time she thought of the life that Alex had been forced to live, the pain and hunger he had endured, all because of Victoria's decisions. But there was also something else, something that Olivia couldn't ignore. It was the feeling of deep sorrow for Hudson. His story had been one of abandonment, of survival, and of painful isolation. He had lived on the streets with nothing but his memories and his will to survive. And now here he was, standing before her, the man who had once been invisible, who had once been discarded, now a part of her world in the most profound way possible. She couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The layers of pity and sympathy she had once felt for him now transformed into something deeper. She saw him, truly saw him, not as a beggar but as a human being who had been unjustly robbed of everything. And yet, despite the cruel twist of fate that had brought him back into her life, there was a quiet dignity about him. His struggle to survive had shaped him into a man with strength and resilience, and Olivia admired that. It was during one of the many sleepless nights that followed, as Olivia sat in front of her vanity, her reflection staring back at her with a mix of sadness and resolve, that she finally admitted to herself what had been growing inside her. She wasn't just guilty about what had happened to Hudson. She was also guilty for not seeing it sooner. Her life had been so insulated from the harsh realities of the world that she hadn't noticed the injustice in front of her. She had been raised to believe that wealth, status, and power were the most important things in life. But now she could no longer deny the truth. The real measure of a person wasn't in their bank account or their social standing. It was in their humanity, in the kindness they showed to others, and in their willingness to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. The next day, Olivia knew she had to do something. She couldn't sit idly by while the world she had known fell apart around her. She couldn't be complicit in her stepmother's cruel machinations any longer. It was time to take action, to stand for something greater than herself. She didn't know what that would look like, but she knew it had to start with Hudson. It was a meeting that neither of them had expected, nor were they prepared for. Olivia had summoned Hudson to her house, wanting to speak with him, to try and understand what had happened. She had expected to feel a mixture of guilt, embarrassment, and confusion. But instead, when she saw him standing in front of her, dressed in clothes that, though simple, still seemed out of place in the mansion's grand entryway, she felt something different. It was respect. "Hudson," Olivia said, her voice softer than she intended, "I need you to understand something. I'm sorry for everything. Sorry for the way my family treated you, and for the role I played in it." Her eyes met his, searching for some indication that he understood, some acknowledgement that her apology had any meaning. Hudson's expression softened, though it remained guarded. "You didn't know, Olivia," he said quietly. "None of this was your fault. You were caught in a system you didn't create. But now things are different." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't deserve his forgiveness, but there it was, given freely and without bitterness. He was giving her a chance to make things right, to be part of something bigger than herself. "I want to help," she said, her words spilling out before she could stop them. "I don't know how, but I want to. I want to fix this, all of it. I can't just go back to pretending like everything is fine, like this never happened." Hudson studied her for a long moment before he spoke. "It's not about fixing everything, Olivia. It's about making the right choices now. It's about using your privilege, your position, to help those who don't have the opportunities you do. You've seen what it's like on the streets. You know what it's like to feel invisible, to be ignored." His words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. She had always been told she had a responsibility to uphold her family's legacy. But what if that legacy could be something better? Something that helped people, that made the world a little less cruel? She realized that in that moment she had the power to do something that mattered. It wasn't about playing the game Victoria had set for her. It was about creating a new path, a path that led to change, to redemption, and to justice. "I'll do whatever it takes," Olivia said, her voice resolute, her heart full of purpose. "I want to help you. I want to help the people who need it most. And I'll stand by you no matter what." Hudson gave her a small, approving nod. "We can't change the past, Olivia, but we can change the future. And the future doesn't have to be like the past. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone." The room felt suddenly brighter, the air lighter. It was as though something had shifted between them, an unspoken bond formed through shared understanding and commitment. Olivia knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would be fraught with challenges, but also one that held the promise of something much greater than anything she had ever known. As she watched Hudson leave, a sense of peace settled over her. She had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy or that her relationship with her stepmother would ever be the same. But for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner to Victoria's rules. She was free to choose her path, free to make a difference, free to be the person she was always meant to be. And with that, Olivia knew one thing for certain. The story of her life was no longer being written by the hands of her stepmother. It was being written by her own. In the weeks that followed Hudson's revelation, life seemed to be in a constant state of flux for both him and Olivia. The air between them was thick with unresolved questions and unspoken emotions. But as the dust began to settle, Olivia found herself with a renewed sense of purpose, even in the midst of all the chaos. For so long, her life had been carefully curated by others. Her father, her stepmother, the expectations of society. But now, as she stood at the precipice of something new, she realized that the life she wanted was hers to create, and no one, not even her stepmother, would dictate who she was meant to be. Hudson, too, had been grappling with the magnitude of the events that had unraveled. He had spent years in obscurity, his true identity hidden from the world, and the sudden shift in his life had left him feeling both empowered and vulnerable. The revelation that he was the legitimate son of Jonathan Howard had turned everything upside down. The world, which had once seen him as nothing more than a beggar, now had to recognize him for who he truly was, a man with a past that could no longer be ignored. But beyond the wealth, beyond the power and status, there was something deeper stirring within Hudson. His connection with Olivia had become a beacon of light, guiding him towards something he had never dared to imagine. A future where he was not defined by his past, but by the choices he made moving forward. Olivia had always seen herself as someone with a responsibility to her family, to her name, to the social circles she had been born into. But she had never realized just how heavy those expectations had weighed on her until now. As she looked at Hudson, someone who had been cast aside and left to fend for himself on the streets, she saw the true cost of privilege and power. She had spent her life avoiding the darker realities of the world, pretending that they didn't exist. But now, the truth was undeniable. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that the world was a just place for everyone, when it had so clearly failed people like Hudson, people who had been discarded without a second thought. The truth that had been exposed about Victoria's manipulation, about Hudson's true identity, had shattered the foundation of everything Olivia had believed in. But rather than retreat into the comfort of denial, Olivia found herself standing taller than ever. She could no longer ignore the truth. She could no longer pretend that she didn't have the power to make a difference. She had seen the impact of kindness, of compassion, and now she was determined to use her position to help others who had been forgotten by society. For Hudson, the realization of his heritage had been a double-edged sword. While it gave him a sense of belonging, a sense of reclaiming what had been unjustly taken from him, it also brought a host of challenges he hadn't been prepared for. The sudden shift in his circumstances was both a blessing and a burden. He had spent so many years on the streets, surviving on scraps, living in a constant state of uncertainty, that the idea of having wealth, influence, and power was almost alien to him. He didn't want to become like the people who had once looked down on him, the people who had never seen him as anything more than a beggar. He didn't want to become another person consumed by the very things that had driven him to the streets in the first place. But he couldn't deny the pull of his newfound reality. There was a part of him that felt a deep sense of responsibility to those who had been left behind, just as he had been. He had seen the pain, the hunger, and the suffering that came with being invisible to society. And now, with the resources at his disposal, he knew he could make a real difference. But it wasn't just about the money or the position. It was about using his story, his struggle, to show others that redemption was possible, that no matter how far you had fallen, there was always a way back. Olivia and Hudson found themselves drawn together, not just by their shared connection to the Howard family, but by a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for something greater than themselves. It was clear to both of them that their bond was more than just a consequence of the circumstances that had brought them together. It was a choice they had made to face the truth, to challenge the world that had shaped them, and to fight for justice no matter the cost. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, both external and internal, that would try to pull them back into the world of deceit and manipulation they had both come from. Victoria's grip on Olivia was far from loosened, and the reality of their world, with its unspoken rules and social expectations, was not easily dismantled. But together, Olivia and Hudson were determined to face whatever challenges came their way. The transformation they had both undergone was nothing short of remarkable. Olivia, once a young woman defined by the wealth and status of her family, had become someone who sought to create change, to challenge the system that had held so many people down. She was no longer just a figurehead in a gilded cage, but a woman with a purpose, driven by compassion and the desire to make a difference. Hudson, on the other hand, had gone from being an invisible man on the streets to someone with the power to change the very systems that had once oppressed him. He had been given a second chance at life, and he was determined to use it not for personal gain, but to create a legacy of kindness, of giving back, of righting the wrongs that had been done to him and to others like him. They both knew that they had to act quickly. Time was running out, and Victoria's influence was not something that could be easily undone. But they also knew that they had something that Victoria could never take from them: each other. Their shared purpose was a bond that would be unbreakable, no matter how hard the world tried to pull them apart. Their first step was to confront the injustices that had been done to Hudson and to right the wrongs that had been done to so many others. The foundation they had created together, the Howard Harrison Foundation, was their first real step toward creating lasting change. It was an organization built on the values they both held dear: compassion, justice, and the belief that everyone, regardless of their background, deserved the opportunity to thrive. As they worked tirelessly to provide shelter, job opportunities, and education for those who had been cast aside by society, Olivia and Hudson found themselves becoming symbols of hope in a world that had often felt hopeless. Their story, the story of a beggar turned heir, of a privileged young woman turned advocate, became a beacon of light for others who had lost their way. People from all walks of life were inspired by their dedication to making the world a better place. And as the foundation grew, so did the impact they had on their city, their community, and eventually the world. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Victoria, who had once held all the power, now found herself on the defensive. Her carefully constructed empire was crumbling, and her own lies and manipulations were coming to light. As the investigation into Jonathan Howard's death gained momentum, the full extent of Victoria's crimes began to unfold. She had long used her position to control and manipulate others, but now the walls were closing in, and her world was slowly unraveling. For the first time, Olivia saw her stepmother for who she truly was: a woman driven by fear, by an insatiable hunger for power, and by a deep insecurity that she had tried to cover up with wealth and status. Olivia no longer felt pity for her, only a deep sense of sadness. Victoria had never understood the true meaning of family, of love, of kindness. And it was that misunderstanding that had led to her downfall. In the end, Victoria's fate was sealed. The charges against her were too great to ignore, and the public shunned her for the life she had built on lies. She had lost everything: her wealth, her status, and her power. But more than that, she had lost the respect of the people who had once admired her. She was left alone, isolated and forgotten, a shadow of the woman she had once been. As Olivia and Hudson stood together in the midst of it all, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would always be more work to do, more lives to touch, and more injustices to fight against. But for the first time in their lives, they felt free. They had found each other, and in each other, they had found the strength to change the world. Their story, once born of pain and suffering, had become one of redemption and hope. Together they had rewritten their destinies, and in doing so, they had given hope to the millions who had been left behind. And as they looked toward the future, hand in hand, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their love had transformed them, and through their love they had transformed the world. In the end, Olivia and Hudson's journey was one of redemption, truth, and the power of choosing a different path. From betrayal and manipulation to uncovering a hidden legacy, their story proves that no matter how broken we feel, we have the strength to rewrite our story. The key lies in compassion, confronting our past, and using our privilege and power to help others. By standing together, they not only healed themselves, but also transformed the lives of those around them. The lesson here is simple. We are not defined by our past, but by the choices we make today. Even in the darkest moments, kindness and resilience can change everything. Apply this to your own life. No matter the struggles you face, never stop believing in your ability to create a better future for yourself and others. Now here's a quick question for you. What is the most important lesson from Olivia and Hudson's journey? A. Wealth and power define success. B. Kindness, compassion, and resilience are the true keys to change. Comment your answer, A or B, below, and let's see what everyone thinks. Also, what are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe kindness can truly change the world? Share your opinions in the comments for a meaningful discussion, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support us and stay tuned for more stories that inspire.